DAB Digital Radio, digital TV, downloads and online.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
So tonight, your calls, please, on the state of the housing market. Rightmove says that it's seen a surge in properties which are coming onto the market, and they're putting it down to the abolition of those home information packs in England and Wales. Are you seeing that where you are? Is there really a pickup in the property market? It would seem remarkable, wouldn't it, given that we're just sort of edging out of a recession. But is this true? Call us on 0500 909 693. The text, of course, as always, 850 58. The bank holiday weekend, this May one, at the end of May, is usually a really bumper time for buying and selling houses. People are free, they're looking into properties. Has it been that busy out there? Property investment company Assets is saying that average house prices in April were nearly 10% higher than at the same time last year. And that's the highest since August 2008. Is that a reality? Is now a good time, then, to buy a house or not? I want your experiences tonight. Are you tempted? Are you tempted to look at your bank account, to think of approaching the bank manager, to look at maybe a second property or an investment? I mean, how are you feeling right now about the housing market? Call me on 0500 909 693. We've got plenty of people to talk to us about this tonight. First, let's bring in Mickey Clark of 5 Live Money. Evening, Mickey.
Evening.
What can we make of this? It seems like quite an interesting thing that Rightmove are saying, but can we really... How much store can we put by it?
Not a lot.
OK, thanks for that.
Rightmove is an estate agent. It sells houses. It's hardly going to say the market's moribund, prices are falling and we can't sell any. So it seems to me that there are people in the housing property market who say if you took it up long enough and hard enough, eventually it will recover. It doesn't work that way. People gave up buying houses just to live in about 20 years ago. It became a one-way street as an investment. Property price, you bought at one level, you sold it a couple of years down the line for a much higher level, you made a nice turn. I think what you're seeing now is, this idea that people are selling houses because the hip packs have gone, which were a waste of time in the first place. I think that's a nonsense. If you've got a nice profit tucked away in a home or a second home for a few £1,000s, you're going to worry about £200 or £300. I don't think so. I think what's happening now is that people are more focused, especially those with second homes, about paying a capital gains bill, which at the moment might be 18% of their profits, soon going up to 50% of their profits. One of my golfing buddies at the weekend said he'd put a flat up for sale on the south coast, which he and his wife owned, and had been renting it out to students. They were selling it because at some stage they didn't want to get hit by a 50% tax charge. So I think you are seeing properties come on the market, but to say that this is a revival, I'm not so sure. I mean, look at the mortgage approvals. They've been slumping all year. I mean, 51,000 in March, down to 47,000 in April. People may want to buy houses, and I have every sympathy for them, but the banks are not lending money to first-time buyers unless they want to pay through the nose for it.
Yeah, and Mickey, the fact remains, average house price, around 200,000? Still
too much.
Yeah, an average salary, 25 grand.
The government said, we're cutting the stamp duty on houses under 250,000. Well, all that's going to encourage people to do is go out and buy a dearer house. You've got to put these things in perspective. And the housing market at the moment is still far too high for first-time buyers to get on that rung. And if you haven't got first-time buyers, you haven't got a housing market.
Mickey, Robert Reid is a Cheshire estate agent. You were kind of just sort of not sure there, Robert. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much interesting stuff there. I think I probably agree with half of what Mickey says and half of what he doesn't. I mean, I think on a couple of points, I'd actually disagree about the hips and saying that 200, 300 quid doesn't matter to people. I think that's nonsense, actually, because I was just around measuring one up on Saturday, a house, and this family, this hip was going to cost them 325 plus VAT. They said, well, that makes a massive difference to us. That pays for a substantial slice of our holiday or what have you. So I think it's wrong to say that doesn't make a difference and doesn't affect people, maybe being a bit more speculative having a go. I think it probably does, so I disagree with him on that. Second thing to say is, on Rightmove actually isn't an estate agent. I think that's important to say. Rightmove is just a portal which lists properties.
Yeah, but they still need the turnover, Robert. I mean,
we say that.
You can split hairs there, but if you haven't got a rising housing market, you haven't got an estate agent or a portal that's making money.
With respect, you're wrong, because what Rightmove does is list them, whether or not they're sold or whether they're not. So actually, I'm not sure that's an entirely right thing. Now, in terms of the other point, which is really, really interesting, about what's the market doing overall, I tend to sort of stay a middle ground. There's some people who say the market's absolutely bouncing back, it's fantastic, it's really going to go places. I don't agree that it's back at peak levels by any stretch of the imagination. I still think there's a lot of... The biggest change in market conditions at the moment is the need to get 20% really deposit to get a good mortgage offer.
On an average house, how much is that?
Well, so that's a very...
20 grand, isn't it?
Yeah, and this is crucial because I think this is the thing which is the biggest change in market conditions more than actual prices. 'Cause if you take your average, say, first-time buyer... If you look at Cheshire, the cheapest terrace house you're going to buy in Cheshire is probably going to 80 grand, maybe in Crewe or something like that. Now, if you look at 20% of that, that's £16,000. Now, if you are, let's say, just left university, you probably left university with a debt, you're probably finding the jobs market very difficult, and suddenly now you're having to find 16,000 quid. Now, I think that's actually in some ways... probably in the longer term thing sensible because it brings equity back into the housing market, which is probably the problem in the first place. All these 100% mortgages probably were wrong. But if you're talking about a change in market conditions, that is a very dramatic one, and I think it will take probably 3 or 4 years for that to fully flow through and then work its way.
Well, you say that, Robert, but interest rates, if you haven't noticed, are 0.5%. Now, according to the OECD last week, they're set to rise by the end of next year. So if they go up to 3.5%, 5%, 6%...
Which is not inconceivable, I agree.
What are you going to be charged as a borrower by the banks? They're not going to give you cut price deals.
Mickey, just explain who the OECD are.
They're the Overseas Economic Development Council. They plot basically what the UK economy is doing, in fact, what world economies are doing, and they've been very scathing about the fact that we've got 0.5% interest rates by the Bank of England at the moment. That's to try and stimulate the economy and get things going. Well, yeah. And what they're saying is that they should rise to 3.5% by the end of next year. Now, that may not sound a lot, but if you're paying for a mortgage...
It's substantial.
It will. I think you're trying to create a disagreement between us, Mickey. I'm not saying we particularly do disagree on that point. I think the interesting thing is there are a lot of vendors at the moment who if you go back to 2008, were potentially facing quite tricky times and facing very high repayments on mortgages and what have you, but then the rates came down, which have rescued particularly a lot of buy-to-let landlords.
But won't repossessions then will go up, won't they, if this interest rate goes back up?
Yeah, and it's a funny dilemma because, of course, if interest rates go up to, say, 3% or something like that, in a historical context, that's not actually a massive sum when you could look at what rates were 10, 15 years ago, but compared to the rates that we're talking about at the moment, it's quite high. So I think that will... What I'm saying is that house prices are talked about a lot, but actually mortgages and interest rates are a really significant part of it.
Let me just bring in another couple of people, you two. Jonathan Davies is with us as well. He's a property expert and is an investment advisor for financial planners. Jonathan Davies, Wealth Management. Evening, Jonathan.
Hi, Ranveer.
We've also got Kate Faulkner, who's a property expert and author of The Which Buy, Sell, Move House book. Evening, Kate.
Evening.
Jonathan, what do you... you work in investment, clearly. This claim from Assets saying that the average house price is up nearly 10% than it was the same time last year. Is this really just a blip down to foreign investors playing on the weak pound, maybe, in London? I mean, does it come down to something like that?
It's partly that. Certainly there's been a large number of transactions in London to foreign buyers, and London prices, of course, are so huge compared to the rest of the country, so it does skew the prices. But the main reason for the price rise in the last year is simply because as prices had fallen so dramatically from the end of 2000 to the beginning of 2009, the supply of properties stopped dead. Look at the website of the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, and they will show brilliant graphs there that the supply of properties fell through the floor, but demand did not. Therefore, Economics 101, prices rose over the last year. But look further into their own website. These are basically estate agents talking, and you'll see that in the last 6 months, supply has been going through the roof, but demand has not been rising. Economics 101, we're going to very soon enter a very similar period to 2008, where supply is up, demand is not, prices will go through the floor.
Yeah.
That is inevitable.
So, Kate, hang on, Robert, do you agree with any of that?
My own view is that I think prices are going to stay pretty static. I think in the next 5 years you're going to see them probably go up and down a bit. If you want me to predict here and now, I would say in 5 years' time, I think prices will be pretty similar to where they are
Robert,
today.
we're talking about the prices that the estate agents say the property's worth, and the price that the actual figures, once you've done the deal, how much they're... Because there's a big discrepancy between what you boast and what the other people pay. £67,000 on average, they reckon.
Well, that's stats. I mean,
it's absolutely impossible
what I would, no,
prices can stay flat.
Can I answer that question? Just to answer the question about the gap between asking prices and selling prices, I would say that has actually narrowed quite a bit. If you look at 2008, when things were really at their worst, I think you did very well to close a deal within 10% of its asking price, which, for example, on a £500,000 house, you're talking a 450 sale. I would say in the last, 6 months particularly, you've seen that gap narrow significantly, and you're probably selling it. I can only speak for myself, but I'm probably selling on average between sort of about 3-4% from asking price, which is reasonable, I think. I don't think that's so bad.
Kate Faulkner is with us. It's so difficult to know, isn't it? Even hearing all of these facts and experts in their field disagreeing. If you want to sell right now or if you want to buy, is it a good time?
I think the problem we've got is that we concentrate so much on house prices, and we talk about average house prices, and we talk about these reports, and we're currently reporting what we're doing this year in 2010 versus 2009, and I think it's completely misleading.
Why?
And to give you an example, the Land Registry average price at the moment is £165,000. Rightmove's average price is £235,000. So what can anybody learn from that? Well, not a lot, I don't think.
That's the whole point.
I agree with Kate.
Hold on. Everybody's had their chance. Let me have a chance to say that.
Jonathan, hang on a second. Kate just wants to finish her point, and then I'll bring Jonathan in.
Exactly what Nicky Clark said.
The whole point of this is that data includes London, which is a completely different market to the rest of the country.
Totally agree.
So the second point from that is we've got this crazy differential between the average house prices. Secondly, what you've got is house prices reports year on year. So 2010, not a great year, versus 2009, not a great year. And we're in a kind of weird state at this moment. And really, the only two things we should be interested in, as far as prices are concerned, is what is the average price, or what is the price of a property in my area that I want to buy, and what is the price of the property in my area that I want to sell,
exactly.
And how are we doing versus 2007?
Jonathan, why not true?
Because we have to look to the future. There's no point looking at what happened previously. I can also tell you what the weather was yesterday, but that's not going to help me know whether or not I need a brolly tomorrow. What we need to consider is the government is going to bring in billions and billions of cuts in public sector spending. We're forecasting, unfortunately, but, we don't make the rules, we're forecasting 150,000 job losses in the public sector by the end of next year, 500,000 job losses in the public sector within 5 years, so long as the Parliament continues.
Okay.
On top of that, credit will continue to be restricted. On top of that, there'll be a vast swathe of home repossessions, particularly with buy-to-lets. The supply of property will go through the roof. There'll be a biblical flood. That's why prices will fall over the next 2 or 3 years.
But actually, there's one more thing to add to that.
I just want to bring in Ranjit, Kate,
okay.
if you don't mind. Ranjit's called in 0500 909 693. Evening to you, Ranjit.
Hi, Ranvi. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Where are you? Whereabouts in the country?
Wolverhampton.
Right, in Wolverhampton. And what's your housing situation?
Well, my property's probably worth about 200 plus. And I've got about 150,000 tied into the house now. And I was hoping to release some of the funds to purchase another property. But the banks aren't giving me no mortgage. I can't get a mortgage to invest into another property. So, I've tried through building societies, through financial advisors. Yeah, I can understand because probably my circumstances. I'm registered disabled and no longer working. But, so it's something for the kids I can build for them, but can't get a mortgage.
Ranveer, can I comment on that?
Go on, then.
500,000 buy-to-let mortgages were taken out at the top of the biggest asset bubble in history in 2005, 2006 and 2007. That easy lending policy by the banks and allowed by the then government, that's what created the biggest bubble in history. You have a prime example there of credit restriction. and the credit restriction will continue for years, because the banks have no money.
So, Jonathan,
that's the reason why prices will plummet. So,
Jonathan, talk to Ranjit. Ranjit, it's fair and right that you shouldn't be given this money by the bank. Is that what you're saying, Jonathan?
He should not be putting more money into property. We have had what we say in the parlance. Well, for all the reasons that I've said already, we have had in the last year what we say in market parlance a dead cat bounce. It's the biggest suckers rally in history. Just look at the facts of what was going to happen to unemployment, to repossessions, to the supply of properties. It's just so obvious.
Robert, who's our resident estate agent here, come in here and talk to Ranjit too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the interesting thing is I've had this debate with Jonathan before. Remember, Jonathan was on 6 months ago predicting the end of the world, and we're all still here today. So that in itself I find reassuring. And I think
and the number of transactions have not risen; they've fallen.
Well, come and see my office, Jonathan, and we'll have a chat. But if we look at our caller in Wolverhampton, if we stop shouting,
Jonathan, just let him talk to Ranjit.
If we stop shouting and listen to our caller in Wolverhampton, I think actually to a certain degree, why should I, or Jonathan for that matter, tell Ranjit where he should put his money? It should surely be his choice. Now, he might decide that he wants to put it in property, and why shouldn't he do so? He might decide
he can't because he's not getting the money from the bank.
I want to take 25,000 out of this property and invest it in another property, which is basic. I needed 25% of the house I wanted to have a look at, which was 25,000. Rental was pretty good, 550, and my outgoings were a lot less. So that property would have been talking for itself at the end of the day.
But would that have put you in a situation whereby you maybe haven't got enough equity in your own property, the one that's got a roof over your head, and maybe that's the concern?
I've got 150,000, which is already tied into this house.
Right, so they're not letting you have it.
I've got a mortgage of under 40,000.
You're assuming that the property price will rise. It won't. It'll fall. Do not put more money into property in May 2010. Wait a couple of years.
But you said that 6 months ago.
Yeah, but also,
my question 6 months ago because the property market doesn't move in 6-month periods.
Well,
it actually moves in 3 months.
In a number of years.
I'm looking at a long-term investment, not 2 years.
Hang on a minute.
14 years up, and now it will have several years down. That is inevitable after the biggest economic collapse in history.
You told me that 12 months ago. You told me that 6 months ago.
You're changing it now to 12 months.
Well, it's both.
Well, actually, I do have a question back for Jonathan. Help me out here, because there are some areas, to be fair to Jonathan, there are some areas that have dropped substantially.
I agree.
And I think the difficulty that we have is we're all trying to talk in generics here. And actually, the problem with property is that it is not one market. And
Correct.
And it is a localised market.
Correct.
Now, bear with me, Jonathan. I do understand what you're saying, but I think my biggest reason why I don't side with you on what you're saying, Jonathan, is because for property prices to drop by 50%, two things have got to happen. Either people have got to agree to sell their home by 50% less than it is now, and the second reason is you're right. If we get to those unemployment figures, that's not going to look great. There's going to be lots of forced sales. But do you know what? The majority of people are going to be out in the streets, and we're going to have so many other worries like no hospitals to go to, all sorts of things. So my question to Jonathan is that 2008, 2009 were the worst years ever that we've ever had. Now, if property prices were going to fall by up to 50%, as predicted, and we do know that, to be fair to Jonathan, in some areas they have on some properties, but why didn't they go then? And I agree with you that we're not in a bounce stage. I think we're going to end up static for this year, and I think it'll bumble along for several years. So why didn't it happen?
Because the banks were skint.
The Bank of England interest rate from 5% to 0.5%.
Right, but all that did, when you compare it to the 1990s, but all that did compared to the 1990s is halve the number of repossessions. Repossessions in the 1990s went up to over 80, and now they're at 45.
Most of the mortgage lending is now owned by the United Kingdom government, and they basically told the bankers, don't repossess before the election. Well, that is now out the window. I do not make the rules, but watch the repossessions go through the roof now that the election's out the window.
Jonathan,
but all people did last time was put them back on the rental market.
Can I just help you there, Kate?
The
reason that the repossessions haven't been perhaps as high as some of the gloomy people forecast is the banks can't afford to repossess. They'd love to keep the people in there paying because they've got so many repossessed properties on their books. The last thing they want to do is start writing off millions and millions of pounds more of loans. That's the reason that we haven't seen the repossessions. If they can keep someone in there and keep it going, then they haven't got to write it off, and that's what they've been doing.
Well, to be honest, I actually think it's the interest rates that is the biggest reason.
Yeah, but who have
I think
they benefited,
you're right that
Kate?
and I do work within this market. And
Yeah, but who
particularly
have the low interest rates benefited? They've benefited the people that overextended themselves, overborrowed. They're the ones who are really making the money out of this. The poor
but they're
people
not necessarily making money. They're not having to
They're not making money, but they've seen
Yes,
they've seen the cost of their mortgages plunge. And they're the ones that we shouldn't be helping out. We should be helping the ones who can't afford it because they're either out of work.
sweeping
Well,
statement.
if it helps us to get out of the recession, surely it's a good thing.
It doesn't.
Does Mickey want to see more repossessions? Can we just ask
No,
that?
no,
that's what
I'm not saying that. I'm telling you the reason. I'm telling you the reason there weren't the repossessions.
But you're
that were
saying they shouldn't be
forecast.
helped.
Right, listen, we're just...
No,
Is
not
that
at
right?
all.
Well, you just said that, didn't you?
We are into
don't.
the last minute before 11 o'clock. Can I just ask each of you, just for one answer on this, is now the right time to be buying or selling a house? Robert?
Yes, but don't have any silly ideas about it going flying up.
Mickey?
Depends what price you pay for it in the first place.
Kate?
As long as you can rent that property out and cover your costs if things go badly for yourself.
And Jonathan, dare I
We're
ask?
forecasting a 30% fall in prices right across the country over the next 3 years.
Is that all?
No more rowing. That was really good. Thank you very much, guys. Any more of your thoughts? 85058 or 0500 909 693. Thanks to Mickey, thanks to Jonathan, thanks to Robert, and thanks to Kate.